The timing on recording this is probably going to be good or bad, depending, because I just finished reading Legacy of the Brightwash and my heart hurts. Hello everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Case and Shelf, where we talk about books. Today is going to be a catch up on what I've been reading since the last video. I think I've read 5 books since the last time we've chatted, and I've got 1 on the go at the moment, so we're gonna dig into it. Like you saw in that opening clip, I just finished Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar. This is book 1 in the Tainted Dominion series, and I am just full of emotions at the moment with how that ended. I'd like to say I'm okay, but mostly not. Crystal apparently likes to emotionally devastate people as much as possible, and it was a success. If you are not familiar with the book, this follows multiple POVs. It is a chunker of a book. It's a bit of a gas lamp fantasy, if you will. The world is just brutal and terrible, and it just explores the people that are caught in this terrible world, trying to find connections, trying to be better, do better, and there is just, it's very bleak. It's very bleak, but fascinating at the same time as we watch these people struggle yet still strive for betterment in their lives. The story starts off where one of the main characters, Tashaway Blackwood, comes across a dead young girl on the bank of the Brightwash River, if you will, and it is heart-wrenching from there to know that children are being murdered, and he is trying to look into it, and at the same time when he is trying to investigate this, no one else seems to care. It's just heartbreaking. And the story that evolves from there and everything that ends up occurring as a result of conflicts between the Authority, the Red Dawn, and the Dominion, it's just, all of it is quite intense at the same time. So I ended up taking my time reading this. Overall, I think I read this over the course of several months slowly. Ishmael is another character that I just adore. He is the type of character who you can tell is a little bit broken, probably a little bit more, but yet he is still the light of the room when he walks in. He's also just a blast to read as a character. In addition to Tashaway trying to track down what happened to this poor girl who was found on the banks, he's also trying to save his son Jason from the Rift, which is a place where unregistered tainted go, basically. The tainted are people with powers, abilities, and they're pretty much viewed as a threat. And if they're not registered and working specific tasks with their powers and abilities, they are considered wild, feral, and end up in the Rift like Tashaway's son, Jason. Because Tashaway is also a military man, he believes that the Authority's laws should be upheld. This just adds tension between him and his son, and everything that develops as a result of it, because Tashaway is still trying to be there for his son, do what he can to help him, and yet his son obviously is non-compliant because he does not believe in the rules that are set in place against the tainted. So there's conflict. You have very human explorations of these characters, but also plenty of others, because this is multi-POV. There are several other characters we get insights into and their personal struggles. They're all detailed. They're so well explored, and I thoroughly enjoyed the emotional exploration, the very human and devastating realities of these kind of worlds, because fantasy, I mean, when you look at fantasy, there's magic and there's all of these different worlds and creatures, yes, but when you look at how these societies are built, this is a great exploration of what happens to a society similar to X-Men in a way, where one unpowered type of being who exists in the world fears the other, and the extents that they will go to try and control that and make the world safer for them. Now, there is some romance to this, so while I enjoyed all of the other aspects, the romance wasn't quite to my liking. It's just a hot mess. That's the best way to put the romance. It's a hot mess with one just glimmer of potentially genuine relationship. I'm not even sure at this point because everyone just has so many problems and they all bleed through into the relationship aspect. There are also quite a few bedroom scenes, which personally I did skip. I'm not a bedroom scene reader. I do like the nice cut to black type of style and storytelling when it comes to that. But yeah, everyone is just a hot mess when it comes to relationships. And I feel like that's all I can say without digging into spoilers. But yes, this was a fantastic read regardless. The world, how the society is formed, the conflicts, the characters' very vulnerable journeys throughout all of this, and how they overcome such tragedies and devastating situations, and the reveals, everything is just incredibly done. So yes, I will be reading book 2. Crystal, you broke my heart. Thanks for that. In addition, I also read Wild Skies by K.E. Andrews. I have thoroughly enjoyed quite a few of what K.E. Andrews has written over the years, and this was no exception. I had a blast with this one, and I'm still newer to this genre blending, which is a fantasy western, but I enjoyed how it was done. It was a mix of fast-paced, cozy, action-packed, high stakes, and intriguing world all at the same time. We have our main character. I can't even remember his name now. I just remember Bean. See, I don't remember the main character's name, but I remember Bean. Bean is the dragon companion, and he is absolutely adorable. Dale Hartwell is the main character in this series. He is a bounty hunter with his companion dragon, Bean, and Bean acts a little bit like a puppy dog, if you will. There's a blending of How to Train Your Dragon in with the fantasy western world, which I absolutely adored. So after Dale captures and is bringing in his latest bounty, he decides that if he's going to make headway in the world, if he is going to make headway in his goals, he needs to set his sights a little higher in terms of his targets. Checking out the wanted posters, he sees one for a Talon, someone who is high up on that wanted list, a high reward, hard to catch. No one's been able to do it. And this individual has a mark typically around trains. They're known for robbing trains and getting away with it. So Dale decides he's going to take on Talon and try and collect that bounty to set him up for the next while. So here's the thing. Dale is also trying to get this money not just to set him up for some time, but in order to find his missing parents. His parents were kidnapped about 15 years prior, and he's spent all this time trying to look for them, and he is hoping that by getting the bounty off of Talon, if he can even do it, he can spend more time trying to track down what happened to his parents all those years ago. Really, what was fun about this is that you have the fantasy western setting where you have the train robberies, you have the bounty hunters, and you have the clashing cultures as new developing cities are coming up in the Western world while the existing indigenous people are still there. And like I said, you have these dragons who are just, Bean was like a puppy. These dragons reminded me so much of How to Train Your Dragon in a way, and that was a delight as well because the dragons just had so much personality to them, and then you pair that with an individual whose personality either matches or conflicts because of their bond. It was a darling addition to all of the next bit, which is action and the intrigue and the intensity of some of these scenes. There's a lot that goes on, and then you have the high and growing stakes that go along with it all. Now, this is a novella, so it was a quick read, and it's the first installment in a Yeehaw Dragon story series. So where this does leave off, it ends off with potential for continuation, as I am really hoping we get more because I need to know what happens. But the whole thing is just a fast-paced, engaging, and immersive read, and it's all fun at the same time because you have a serious level to it with the stakes and the goals, and then you have that fascinating world with the blending of fantasy and westerns in a really seamless way. And then on top of that, you also have the action and the mysteries and the intrigue to just keep it all going. So This was one that I ended up binging, I think, in just a couple days. If you are the type of person who's looking to delve into fantasy westerns, I would think this is a great place to start, or just to check it out and see if it's up your alley. You get the dragons, the creature, the magic, and then you also get the other western elements that are staples of it: the cowboys, the bounty hunters, the guns, the train robberies, and the world setting in the deserts. So yes, I would highly recommend checking this out if you are newer to the genre or looking for your next fun read in that genre. After that, I read Asunder by Kirsten Hall. Now, I originally went into this on the high recommendation from Esme at the Grimdark magazine. Now, here's the thing. For some reason, despite her recommendation and her review not saying this, I still, for some reason, thought this was a standalone. It is not. It is the first book in a series, so keep that in mind as we talk about it here. Basically, don't make my mistake, because I thought I was going into a standalone, and the way this ended, I was just... I was not prepared. I was not prepared for it to end the way it did, because I was expecting a standalone closure in one read, and now I need to know what happens in the next book in the series. So Kirsten Hall, if you by any chance end up watching this, please keep writing, because I want to know what happens. Now, this is eerie, it's suspenseful, and it's packed with turmoil. Apparently, I like getting characters that are just put through the trenches, because this is what ends up happening to quite a few of these characters. You have a world that is caught between the old and the new, old gods and new gods, if you will, and it's a bit of an eldritch horror at the same time. The world is fascinating. It has thriller aspects and broken characters who are just desperate and struggling to survive. The story itself follows Karis Eska, as you can see on the cover here. She is a death speaker, and she was sent to investigate deaths that were suspicious, because these individuals were sent on a job and never came back. So Karis is sent to figure out what happened, since she can talk to the dead. Now, this is where things get interesting, because it picks up right at that investigation. We're thrown right into the thick of things with Karis. There is no waiting. You are immediately tossed into the intensity of the circumstances, because as Karis is investigating what happened and how these people died the way they did, she happens upon an injured survivor, but he is dying. He has dangerous secrets that need to make it back, so he offers to pay Karis a huge amount of money if she can save him and bring him back to his people. The only problem is that Karis inadvertently binds him to her shadow in an effort to escape and get him out to safety, and from there it just goes into broken individuals, friendship in unlikely places, meddling gods, and life-threatening horrors that await this duo. Now, like I said, this jumps right into the nitty-gritty. You don't really have time to breathe or catch up. You're thrown into the world and the circumstances, and for that reason and the type of pacing that we get in this story, it has that just one more chapter vibe to it. You want to stay up past your bedtime reading it in the best ways possible, and it was so hard to put down. And the world is rich, it's vast, it's complicated. And there were parts where I did have to go back and reread certain world building aspects in order to make sure I was understanding everything. There was a lot of terminology that was unfamiliar to me, and yet, despite having to go back and reread them, I think I was better for that in the end, because I understood things a little bit better. At the same time, this world feels completely foreign and different, and filled with steampunk elements, eldritch horror, we have romance, and even some sci-fi elements to it as well, all tossed in with a magic system, and it's just, there's a lot to this. So if you love world building, if you love episodic stories, and you love the intensity that goes with it all, mystery that turns into intrigue, and characters who are just trying to survive but broken at the same time. And it's a wonderful combination of all of that. Now, another reason why I think the pacing works so well, because it is quick, there were moments where I felt it did slow down a little bit as developments were happening. However, you have characters who are on a ticking time clock. The clock is running down. They have life or death situations against that clock. It is high stakes, and there is just everything is thrown in their path along the way. And because of that, it has an episodic feel to it as well. So keeping that in mind, it almost felt like 4 parts of a story told in one, if that makes sense. I also want to throw a little disclaimer here, because this might be problematic for some people and it might be a selling point, who knows. But because this has some eldritch horror themes to it, there are some moments of gore. So just keep that in mind before you jump into this one. There are those graphic scenes that are included throughout the book. Overall, this is a character and plot-driven story packed with suspense and has a thriller-like quality to it, but it also explores some interesting themes along the way. You have an exploration primarily, for example, of trauma paired with healing, which was really well done. It gave me that feeling of depth to the story. It added life to it through the characters. And then, of course, you pair that type of journey with, well, let's not die situation. And yeah, that's a pretty intense read. Finally, this does have some romance elements to it, and it's primarily a slow burn romance, I would say. Again, not my particular cup of tea, and I completely was not expecting that. Although I think for the circumstances, depending on where the author is going to go with it, it works really well. I just don't know where it's going to go yet. So I'm kind of middle of the line on that one. There's also implied romantic situations that do justice to the characters. Everything that happens in terms of the romance fits the characters really well. And whether or not it was my cup of tea, I won't deny that. So if you are looking for a combination of all those different genres and an intense epic read, this is one to check out. And yeah, thank you, Esme, for the fantastic recommendation. Also, if you are not already following Esme, please do. She is a fantastic reviewer. She reads with just a speed I wish I had, but then she also destroys TBRs like it's nothing. And yeah, so if you're looking for great recommendations that just TBR bust things for you, Esme is your person to follow. Next, I read Falling into Oblivion by Aaron M. Payne. This is a cyberpunk-esque story, and congrats to Aaron as well, because he ended up getting a quote on the back of his book from Christopher Rucchio, which I can only imagine he was so over the moon for. If you don't already know, Aaron is also Bibliophile, so go check out his channel if you have not already for some more great bookish content. And this, like I said, it's a cyberpunk-esque story. You've got the neon light shining in a bleak world filled with corruption, noxious air, and desperate people just trying to escape it all. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to talk about the tone a little bit before I get into the story, because I feel like that kind of, it will make sense as we continue to talk. But essentially, this has a mix of being entertaining and giving you an intriguing character to follow, because the author has said it himself. He wants people to read this and have a good time. He wants them to be entertained. And I would say he succeeded in that. I read this in, I think, again, 2 or 3 days. I listened to the audiobook as well, which is greatly narrated. And this is the type of read where you can binge this easily. It's light, even though it has very dark themes and tones to it and circumstances, but at the same time, it has a lightness to it that allows it to be more digestible quickly, if that makes sense. Now, getting back to that other aspect of it, having an intriguing storyline with a character who doesn't really fit the norm of the world. Everyone is getting modified body parts. They're essentially selling their souls for whatever they can get, whether it's, escapes through drugs and illicit things that they should not be doing. And yet you're following a detective, Detective Sol Harcones, while he's investigating a possible connection to body modifications and a dead child. Sol finds himself caught in a string of cases as a result, and it was fascinating because Sol isn't like everyone else in the world. Yes, he's struggling. Yes, he's stuck in this corrupt world with terrible companies running it and everyone just trying to break away from it all. But he hasn't given in to the modifications. He hasn't done any of that. That doesn't interest him. What I got from Sol was that he is a decent guy and he is just trying to make it home to his family, to tuck his daughter into bed. And these string of cases just keep pulling him in further and further, keeping him away from going home. Now, that's not to say that Sol doesn't have his debts, because he does. He's tried to keep his daughter in a very high-end school, costs a lot of money, and on his wage, that's not really possible. And as a result, he's built up debts. But he is trying to secure her future, because if she gets into a better school, she has a better opportunity to get out of these really just these slum type areas that have no potential and no future for her. As a parent, I felt for Sol. For this reason, I think my favorite aspect was Sol's character. He's a decent guy. Keep that in mind. He's a detective, he's a decent guy, in a world where corruption is around every corner. That made it fascinating for me, and how his progression throughout the cases and the strings and series of events that he ends up going through were fascinating, and how his character handled it all. On top of it all, you also have familiar tropes to the genre itself. You have a familiar and fun side cast at the same time. You have the tech whiz who's plucky and a bit mouthy. And then you also have the seasoned detective, just as a couple examples, because there's also criminals, mob bosses, mob people, you name it. There's all kinds of stuff that will be familiar in this world if you've watched that kind of thing or read those type of books before. Really, what's done well in this is the blending of character and plot-driven storytelling with those intense scenes of mystery, a gritty world with witty characters, running jokes, and familiar tropes to balance the tone. I think this succeeds absolutely in being entertaining. I am looking forward to book 2 because this was so much fun, and it went a direction I was not expecting at all. That all being said, I will say that there were moments of foreshadowing I would have liked to have been a bit more subtle. Again, though, this is a book for entertainment purposes, a book where you can just kick back, relax, enjoy. I mean, I say relax, but it's a pretty terrible world, but you get the idea. It's a book you're supposed to be able to kick back with, enjoy, and just go along for the ride. I would have liked a little bit more subtlety in that area, but overall, this was still a great read. I still had a lot of fun with it. And like I said, I still want book 2. And it ended up taking a direction I wasn't expecting, which is even more fun in my opinion. And last but not least, I read Seasons of Albion. This is book 1 in the 8th Chance series. It's a novella at 213 pages by Alain Marché and Christopher Warman. Don't let that cover fool you. Not at all, because I thought I was going in for a story of adventure and potentially heroism, and instead I was met with just tears and emotional devastation. So just forewarning for anyone who wants to dig into this one, but I still highly recommend it. Apparently, I just have a theme going on in the last month of being emotionally destroyed by books. In this novella, there are 4 stories being told. An aspiring enchantress searching for a way to lift a terrible curse, a drunken father makes a dangerous wish, a foreman tilting the balance between nature and progress, and a mother traveling for her dying child in search of a healer. So like I said, I went in with complete wrong expectations on the tone of this, but I was so impressed by the end of reading these stories. Each of these stories were eerie, they were dark, they were foreboding. You get an intimate look into multiple characters' lives, circumstances, and you're effortlessly pulled into their hardships, all while they're going through this. And it's really stories that you get reoccurring characters. So when you start the first story, you see some similar characters. Because it takes place in a town, a village, you see the stories progress throughout the different characters within this town or neighboring areas. Despite all of that, all of these stories are seamlessly woven together, which was incredibly impressive on top of it all. I will say that the stories will hit people differently. For myself, all of them hit hard. Some hit harder than others, but all of them were a hit for me. And that might not be the case for everyone, because every story is different, because every circumstance that they go through is going to be different. But even still, these authors are exploring the worst, misguided, and the best in humanity all across these stories. And I feel like they do it really well. There's also this conflict in the world, because you have the woods folk versus the townsfolk, for example, the new way versus the old ways. And there's some intriguing circumstances that arise because of that. You have the new town folk type of way of living, which is very different from the wood folk, where it's not as neighborly, where it doesn't praise or worship or take care of nature and the world they live in, Albadan, the way that the woods folk believe you should, in order for balance, in order to do things right. Whereas the townsfolk are all about progress and moving forward in bettering their lives, convenience, and it clashes in intriguing ways that are a little bit close to home in a way when you look at our histories. I think this is also a great read for individuals who love world building, because it is a rich world. You have magical creatures, lore, enchantresses, and so much more. And it felt like we only scratched the surface, and I would love to keep reading with book 2, because I would love to explore this world so much more than we did. So because this is for short stories in a novella, I can't talk about it too much, because I don't want to give away spoilers, and it's best experienced for yourself. I honestly think it is well worth the read. It's been on my TBR for a long time, and I regret not reading it sooner personally. It is really the type of book where you sit down, it draws you in, and it sticks with you afterwards. So if you are looking for dark tales of humanity, I can't recommend this one enough. Now, what I am currently reading is The Wingspan of Treason by L.N. Ban. This was a review copy very kindly gifted to me from the author in exchange for an honest review. I'm about 4 chapters in at the moment, and it starts off with quite the draw, if you will, because we follow the main character, Klaus, in his flight of escape of death, because the people who are after him and want his life are his own parents. So yeah, consider me intrigued. I am taking my time with it as well, because it's a chunky book, but it's also quite detailed. The world seems huge. I'm trying to make sure I absorb everything at the beginning so it's not confusing later, hopefully. But that's my own reading preferences when I get into massive worlds, huge conflicts, and very detailed writing. So I do prefer to take it slower. So yeah, I am only at the beginning of this. I am quite intrigued. I've heard phenomenal things about it so far. And visually, it's also a very beautiful book. There's artwork throughout the book in terms of the chapter headers, multiple beautiful maps that are included in this as well. It's just a stunning book. So I am really curious to see what happens to poor old Klaus. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to pick up an audiobook in addition to The Wingspan of Treason. If I do, it will absolutely be this one by Patricia Meredith, which just released recently, because it's the holiday time and I would love to come back to Sam Shovel, another murder mystery at the North Pole, or I guess on this one, the Polar Express. In the meantime, that is everything. I'd love to know what all of you are reading. What did you think of the books that I talked about today? Have you read any of them? Please leave your comments below. I love to hear your thoughts and what you're reading right now. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care of yourselves.